Hey, I'm Ryan, and I've finally finished making my way through my list of albums released in 2025 that I wanted to get around to listening to ultimately assemble a list of my favorites. So I'm going to be counting down a bunch of honorable mentions as well as my top, 15 albums that were my favorite from the year. I've got another 18 honorable mentions, so lots of albums to talk about here. And I'm going to try to go through it pretty quickly rather than let myself struggle with how to convey my love of music in words. I encourage you to check out these albums for yourself and actually listen to see if there's something that you might be interested in. I also have a playlist linked in the description below that has a sampling of songs across all these albums. That's a great way to kind of sample it and maybe find ones that might fit your taste a little better. And if you're anything like me, even finding one new favorite is something to be celebrated. Love finding new music. So let's actually just jump into this with my first honorable mention. The honorable mentions here are just going to be in alphabetical order. These aren't ranked. And so I have Ace by Madison Cunningham. Now, I listened to her album from 2022, Revealer. That was how I discovered her and really enjoyed it and found that she was kind of an interesting singer-songwriter that had a little bit more depth to kind of maybe her instrumentation and songwriting. And I think this one just kind of continues to build on a lot of what I liked about that album. There's maybe something lacking here that's getting me to really be excited to come back to it. I didn't find myself, choosing to come back to it a lot this year. But when I have really enjoyed it. And I think she's just a very strong songwriter, and definitely can recommend this one. Next, I have Anónimo by Juana Aguirre. And I've definitely branched out more into being open with non-English albums, and I found lots of cool Spanish albums in the last few years. This is a really interesting kind of folk album that has a very different sound palette because it mixes in some electronica and some cool beats, but then it's kind of interspersed with very ambient, laid-back acoustic guitar. And I think it's got some really cool stuff happening here. It reminded me a little bit of Mabe Frati had a 2024 release. She's a cellist. And it was a little bit more avant-garde, and it reminds me a little bit of that. I haven't listened to a lot of albums in this genre, but it seems to me that there's some pretty fresh things coming out of from these South American artists here. So definitely worth a look. Next, I have Blizzard by Dove Ellis. This is a debut album from this young Irish folk indie rock singer-songwriter. And I think it's just a really strong debut. It's definitely enough that it has me kind of keeping an eye on what he's up to next. He's got a pretty distinctive voice and style, and kind of the music kind of spans there's definitely songs that sound very much like it has this Irish influence to it, and some of it is a little bit more just free-flowing singer-songwriter. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. Next, I have Alan Sparhawk with Trampled Turtles. Trampled by Turtles, and it's by those two bands, Alan Sparhawk and Trampled by Turtles. Alan Sparhawk, I was not familiar with, used to be in the band Low, with his then wife, who is now passed, and that's actually a big theme on this album, kind of exploration of themes of grief. And it's got this very kind of raw bluegrass folk sound that I think is very much driven by Trampled by Turtles. But some really cool stuff here. I mean, right from the beginning, the opening track, Stranger, has these nice big harmonies. And I just really found myself kind of digging the vibe on this album. So definitely recommend. Next up, a very unknown artist, I think, or at least I think this is not a very popular artist. This is going to be Another Life by Daniel Kleederman. Very cool project that spans a lot of genres. Kind of maybe an art rock is the best way to encapsulate it. I guess I'm not familiar with the artist Barty's Strange, but I guess Daniel is the lead guitarist for his band, and now this is his first solo album, and so he's clearly a very good guitarist, but at least judging from this album, very talented across the board. And there's just a lot of interesting arrangements here, nice guitar work, lots of kind of big builds. I could see this one even going up with more listens. I haven't spent that much time with it. But yeah, very, very cool, kind of unexpected find. Next, I have Gumshoes with Bugs Forever. Now, I discovered Gumshoes a couple years back with his album Cacophony. He has now made it a habit of releasing an album every January, it seems, which then confuses me because it feels like Bugs Forever came out so long ago that it feels like maybe it was even before 2025. I enjoyed Cacophony a lot for whatever reason. It's kind of this indie piano pop, very kind of... happy, sunshiny, but very distinctive vocals that I think are going to make or break whether a lot of people like it. I think Bugs Forever continues on a lot of those strengths, and I like a lot of the tracks. Lots of good little catchy earworms here. Next, we have The Clearing by Wolf Alice. I had always been meaning to listen to some Wolf Alice because I'd heard them pop up in some different places. When I saw the new album was coming out, I used that as my introduction to them, and I enjoyed it. It's got this kind of retro soft rock style, but some very catchy hooks here. From what I can tell from just reading online, it sounds like a lot of their earlier stuff is maybe not that similar to this album. So I'm curious to look back at some of that as well. Next, we have The Crux by Joe, spelled D-J-O. So I actually stumbled across this and listened to it, having no idea that Joe here is the actor Joe Keery of Stranger Things fame, and not knowing that like he's got like one of the most streamed songs. Apparently he's very, very popular, which I'm kind of glad I didn't know, because I kind of just went into it finding, I found this random indie pop album, just put it on. I actually liked this. I didn't have any of the weird celebrity bias as I was listening to it. But I found it to be kind of just a fun, soft pop rock. It reminded me, honestly, a little bit of Paul McCartney. If I think back to some of his earlier stuff, like Ram, or just some of his stuff with the Beatles, I definitely see that influence here. So yeah, I've listened to a little bit of his other stuff. So far, I think this newest album actually might be my favorite of his kind of vibes. It's a little less synthy, I think, than some of his other stuff. And I think I was actually kind of liking it a little bit more. Next, we have Deseo, Carne y Voluntad by Candelabro. This is actually a Spanish album that I was eagerly awaiting because I had listened to Candelabro's first album, Ahora o Nunca, and really love it. That album has really stuck around for me. I really, really just enjoy kind of what they bring with this art rock. I don't even know what I would compare them to, but it flows really well as an album. And so I was looking forward to this, and this sophomore effort definitely feels more ambitious, like they're really pushing with some longer, more complex arrangements, and it largely lands well, and I enjoyed this one. I think I am finding myself preferring kind of the tight punchiness of their first album if I had to pick, but this is still very good, and just yet another reminder of why I'm glad I've explored more non-English bands. Next, we have something that's a little out of left field because I'm not normally a huge like heavy metal guy, but I actually, as an honorable mention here, Dissonance Theory by Coroner. So I'd seen this was coming out, and then looked back and actually saw that I had a friend that really liked their older album, Mental Vortex. So I went ahead and listened to that first, and was actually pleasantly surprised that I actually liked it quite a bit. Now, I'm not a big harsh vocals guy, and that's honestly like all of these like death metal and stuff. That's oftentimes what keeps me from enjoying the genre. And this definitely still has like harsh vocals, but it's like not quite as harsh, I guess, or like for me, it ends up kind of just being a neutral thing. Like it's not a strength of the music, but it doesn't keep me from like sticking around and enjoying it. And the actual instrumental stuff here I found to be very compelling, and it kind of has some really heavy driving stuff, but then it'll get into some more groovy stuff or some more ambient. It mixes it up, I think, a little bit more than other bands I've listened to in this genre. So then after enjoying that album, I listened to Dissonance Theory, and there's I think a 30-year gap here between this album and the last album they had released. And I think this is a pretty remarkable, kind of, I guess, return to form, or just, how consistent they stayed, that this is still feels like it's on the level with the stuff I've listened to from way back then. So I don't know if you're anything like me. Maybe if you're not even normally a death metal person, maybe this album from Coroner is worth a look. Next, we have something very, very different, and that is I'll Be Waving As You Drive Away by Hayden Pedigo. This is some really great guitar-driven instrumental music, and it's really kind of captivating the way it kind of paints these pictures with kind of this driving traditional guitar, but a lot of other sounds worked in here. I found myself returning to this one as well as some of his other albums as just when I wanted to put something on that maybe didn't have lyrics, that maybe had a little bit more of a background music feel, but still was very like interesting to listen to. I really am enjoying the stuff that Hayden Pedigo is putting out. A little bit similar is my next one. Last night I heard The Dog Star Bark by Gwenifer Raymond. Another purely instrumental guitar driven, and here it's like almost entirely, I think, her on just a single guitar. I don't know how much overdubbing is here, but if you like look up any of the videos of her playing live, it's this style of guitar where she's, you know, keeping the bass line going with her thumb while playing these other lead parts. And so it's a very cool style. But I think compared to other things I've listened to in this kind of a classical acoustic guitar style, this is a lot like kind of darker and brooding, at least a lot of the tracks here, and I thought it was very, very cool. And she can get really big with just the energy coming from the single instrument, so I found this one to be a really cool instrumental album as well. Next I have Middle Spoon from Cheekface. Cheekface is a funny kind of geek rock band that definitely is not taking themselves too seriously. I've really enjoyed some of their other albums. This one I don't think is quite as high for me as some of their earlier ones, but they are really consistent with just putting out these fun, quirky pop rock albums. So this is another nice addition to their catalog. Next, I have Nested in Tangles by Hannah Francis. I really enjoyed Hannah Francis's previous album, The Keeper of the Shepherd, I think is the name of that one. And at this point, I think that still is my favorite. I need to spend a little bit more time with this one. But she's just got a very interesting, kind of a unique take on kind of a progressive folk, lots of interesting time signatures and kind of unexpected things in the arrangements and just her vocal delivery on top of it. I really like what she's doing, and this is just another good album from her. Next, we have Phantom Island from King Gizzard and the Wizard Wizard, who have no shortage of albums that they put out. And this is more of them just doing their thing. You know, they like to explore a lot of different genres. Here they're bringing in more orchestral stuff, and so there's a lot of kind of cool stuff there. Admittedly, I haven't listened to this one as much, seeing as I use Spotify for most of my listening, and they decided to take all their music off of Spotify. So for now, I haven't been listening to a lot of King Gizzard, but generally, while I'm not like the hugest fan, pretty much everything I've listened to them I've liked to a certain degree, and this is no exception to that. Speaking of Australian jam psych rock bands, I don't know how much overlap there are between the two. I have Pogo Rodeo by the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. This was a complete... this is a band I've been a fan of for a long time. And this was a surprise album that I didn't even know was coming out because they already released an album this year. More on that later. But this just is more of what I like about these guys. Just lots of rocking, fun tracks. It's some of the heavier rock that I really like a lot of their catalog. And so it's maybe not quite up with my favorite releases by them, but they're really consistent for me. And so this is no doubt an album I enjoy. Next, I have Sinister Grift by Panda Bear. This is the solo moniker of one of the members of Animal Collective. And this is a nice retro-sounding psych pop record that's kind of got this happy feel that honestly feels like is not that common in a lot of music, at least that I am finding myself listening to and enjoying. And so while this one maybe didn't have the highest of highs for me, it just is a fun album and was a pleasant one to listen to. And my last honorable mention, we have What of Our Nature by Haley Hendricks and Max Garcia Conover. I had been introduced to Haley Hendrix through her album, A Seed of a Seed, and really liked that one. She has a very cool kind of traditional acoustic guitar style that she uses with her songwriting. And I think I wasn't familiar with Max Garcia Conover, but it feels like he complements her very well. He almost reminds me a little bit of like a Bob Dylan or something with this kind of like classic singer-songwriter sound. And I think this has a nice set of tracks here with, there's some nice things they can do with the harmonies and stuff working together. So I enjoyed this one. But that brings us to my top 15 albums of the year in ranked order. So these are the ones that pushed up to be, an 8 out of 10 or higher for me. And the first one here, number 15, is Viagra Boys by the Viagra Boys. What a goofy band, and one that I had enjoyed their album Cave World. Hadn't been coming back to it a whole lot, but they just have this quirky but just high energy, like I don't even know how to describe it, but it's very driving grooves. Like the instrumentals here are very catchy and like rocking, but at the same time, the way the singer sings over it and the things he's singing about are just, funny or just odd. And they continue that trend here. There's a lot of weird stuff on here. I mean, if you start listening from the opening track here, you're going to know, I think, very quickly whether this is an album that you enjoy. But man, I've come back to it a few times. There's just a lot of hard-hitting tracks on here that I really enjoy listening to the point where I might actually prefer this one to Cave World. Or at least holistically, the album, I feel like I prefer to Cave World. So kudos to the Viagra Boys at number 15. At number 14, I've already mentioned some kind of singer-songwriter folk albums. This is one that kind of surprised me moving up higher onto my list. This is You and I Are Earth by Anna B. Savage. It's just a very beautiful folk singer-songwriter album. She has a very distinctive, I would say captivating voice. Like it just really kind of carries this a lot. And the way the instrumentals and everything comes together, it just really lays out into a really nice, especially, I kind of listened through a lot of these to finalize my rankings and tried to use my good headphones. And this is one that just really kind of surprised me how it's been moving up my list. So I think to the point where this is, looking at the rest of my list here, is one of my top kind of folk singer-songwriter, more laid-back acoustic guitar-driven albums from this year. Next, we have at 13, Tremens by Sapo Rey. This is a rock band from Argentina, and this is a cool album. I, ran across this and threw it on my to listen list, and I'm glad I did. It blends, I'd say like math rock and progressive rock with more of just like a kind of standard indie rock, but then it's definitely got this like Latin flavor in it, a little more in some tracks than others. And the result feels really fresh. I really enjoy kind of the high energy stuff here. There's even moments where the vocals actually remind me a little bit of the Mars Volta. Maybe it's just because he's singing high and it's in Spanish. I guess that's maybe enough reason. But with the type of instrumentation, too. I mean, the genre here is not that far off. Maybe a little less off the walls as some of the stuff I've listened to from the Mars Volta. But this is big surprise. Really enjoying this album from Sapo Rey. Next, we have the album that probably had the hardest follow-up to do because it's following up an album that I rate 10 out of 10. This is Cancionera from Natalia Lafourcade. I absolutely adore her album De Todas las Flores, and this is still very good. And in a vacuum, it's like this album, I'd probably be, only saying very good things about it, but I have to take it as after one of my favorite albums of all time. And the reality is, I think almost every song on De Todas las Flores I like more than any song on Cancionera. But even so, I still really enjoy this one. It's still a lot of Natalia doing what she does best, and the way they recorded this all live, I mean, you just feel like you are in the room with these musicians just celebrating the love of music. So I do very much enjoy Cancionera. And I am definitely on the Natalia Lafourcade train as far as eagerly listening to anything that she puts out. Next, we have Out There by Hiromi's Sonic Wonder. So Hiromi is a very virtuosic Japanese jazz pianist, and Sonic Wonder is kind of her band for this specific project. And this is a really fun and dynamic jazz fusion album. Now, I enjoy the jazz fusion genre, but I would say outside of Snarky Puppy, which we'll hear about later on this actually, usually I enjoy albums, but they don't end up staying in my rotation. It's like, it's nice, but there's that thing that like pulls it to stick around. And this one did for me. This one has stuck around and I really enjoy it. It's very fun. It's very, just impressive, the musicianship here. I mean, she's ridiculous on the piano, but then the other musicians they have in here. I mean, I'm a bassist and I'm listening to this guy's bass lines and I'm like, it's absurd. But still in a way that's like good musically and not just like showing off riffs and stuff. I really think this is a fun one. And so it's hit the spot for me as another jazz fusion album that I'm keeping in rotation. Bringing us to our top 10. Number 10, I have Pachinko by Moron Police. Now, Moron Police, I really enjoy their previous album, A Boat on the Sea. It was one that when I first listened to it, it felt like it was like, oh, this is cool, but it's just like too much. I mean, it's really like not holding back a lot with these kind of over the top arrangements and virtuosic playing. But I kept listening to it and the hooks kept me in, and it grew into really one of my favorite albums. So I was eagerly excited to hear that another album is coming from Moron Police. And this one is very, very good as well. It's like even more ambitious. It's like a very big concept album. I don't know all of what's going on with the lyrics other than there's some guy that's been like turned into a pachinko machine in Japan. But it really, again, exercises a lot of the strengths on their other albums, maybe even pushes in some new directions. There's some interesting background here in that between these two albums, Moron Police's drummer actually passed away. And there's some themes on the album there, I think, related to that as well. This one came very late in the year, so it feels a little bit harder to rank. This one I could see going up as I listen to it more. That is Pachinko by Moron Police. At number 9, we have Saya by Saya Gray. This is my introduction to her, and just a very unique kind of, I don't even know what top level genre I would use. It's definitely very poppy, but has a lot of like folk, but then also has like kind of electronica. And so it's definitely mixing a lot of things. And I think that's one of the big strengths here is the arrangements are interesting and a lot of interesting use of sounds and harmonies. And I really like how it all came together, and it feels like a pretty fresh album in kind of the more poppy genre to me. So I actually really enjoyed this one. Next, number 8, I have Every Dawn's a Mountain by Tamino. Tamino has been a huge find for me in the last year. This was the first album I found, went through back the rest of his discography, which is extremely consistent in my opinion. I really love what he's doing here with this really stripped back acoustic. He's got a very compelling voice and acoustic style, but there's also points on this album where it does get very big with some of the instrumentation around it. I don't know how I would rank the albums. Like, I feel like they're all very, very close for me. His 3 albums that I've listened to. But very glad that I found this one, and I'm enjoying. I've listened to a lot of him this year across all of his albums. Next, number 7, I have Patience Moonbeam by Great Grandpa. Was not familiar with this band either. And apparently it's their first album in like 6 years or something. And it's a really cool kind of hybrid indie folk rock sound. Like I feel like they kind of walk the line with a few different genres here, which is something I always enjoy. It just adds a little bit of freshness when you're not like so squarely in the lane of one genre. But yeah, it's kind of got this laid back, almost like country vibe at times, which isn't usually like what I gravitate to. But then it like works in a lot of this kind of rock and big moments. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. So surprise one, and especially pushing this high on my list at number 7. I will definitely be keeping an eye on what Great Grandpa may be doing next, as weird as that sounds. Number 6, I foreshadowed this, but there are actually 2 albums that came out from this band this year. This is Carpe, Diem, Moonman by the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. As I mentioned, I've followed them basically back since I listened to High Visceral Part 1 and Part 2 when that was first out. So I guess that's coming up on like almost 10 years now. And they've been super consistent with albums put out, though there was definitely a dip, and I always felt that High Visceral was like the peak of their discography for me, and admittedly, it still is. Those are still my favorite albums. But this Carpe Diem Moonman, I think, is another one that I would put in this like next tier of their next best albums. And I think this one actually, where so many of their albums feel like they play in the same lane of very riffing, hard rocking, this has that. And in fact, if you just listen to the first 2 tracks, you'll be like, this is exactly what this is. And then track 3 will come out and completely surprise you because it's this much less distorted, almost math rock. It's even called Quick Math, which I think is a play on math rock. And there's a number of other songs on this album that kind of lean more into that sonic space. And so it's actually very interesting to hear this band that, you know, normally is through the lens of all this heavy riffing kind of explore these other styles. I think it works really well here. Admittedly, I think my favorite tracks on the album are still some of the heavier tracks. But definitely a really, really strong album here that just adds to a discography of a lot of music that I really enjoy from them. At number 5, I have the album Racing Mount Pleasant by the band Racing Mount Pleasant. I actually found Racing Mount Pleasant before they changed their name. They were previously Kingfisher, and I am going to forget the name of their first album, Grip Your Fist, I'm Heaven Bound, I think. And so I found that while they were under the moniker Kingfisher. Actually really enjoyed that one. I think that was like 2022 or 2023 that one came out. And so when I heard this one was coming out, I was looking forward to it. And this really does feel like the band kind of coming into this new persona with the name change. But I mean, that first album is very strong too. So if you've listened to this one and like it, I definitely recommend going back to the old one as well. But this is a very kind of laid back at times. I mean, a lot of this is very kind of light acoustic, very subdued vocals, but they've got a pretty big outfit here with like horn section, and they've got violin mixed in there, and they really use the instrumentation well to create these beds of sound. And these, a lot of these tracks are a little longer, and it gives a lot of time for it to build these lush soundscapes and reach some really high highs. I mean, there's some huge moments on this album that feel so huge because they're so earned through how it built up through the instrumentation. I actually was able to see this band live this year, which was great. This style of music, to be able to sit in the room and just be enveloped by those builds, very, very cool. And an album that I've enjoyed a lot this year. At number 4, I mentioned Snarky Puppy got a mention earlier as being the jazz fusion band that tends to have their music actually stick around in my rotation, and this is Somni by Snarky Puppy. Now, one of my favorite Snarky Puppy albums is Silva, where Snarky Puppy collaborated with the Metropole Orchestra. I don't know if that might be redundant. Is orchestra mean orchestra in then whatever language? And absolutely love that album. The combination of Snarky Puppy's jazz funk awesomeness with an orchestra and the way that Michael League made these arrangements, one of my favorite albums ever. So when I heard that Somni was happening, which was them basically, is it the 10-year anniversary of Silva returning to do a new project with Metropole Orchestra, I was super excited, and this ends up being really, really good. It's not quite Silva. It's not quite, but that was a hard bar. That's hard to ask of an album, but still really, really good. Some awesome arrangements here. If you haven't had the chance, if you haven't not familiar with Snarky Puppy or haven't seen this, I recommend looking up on YouTube some of the live videos of these being recorded in this huge room with all of these musicians. It's just like an amazing coming together of so many parts. But really cool stuff here. There's a couple spots in this album that maybe drag a little bit, or like there's some long tracks that for me maybe don't quite earn the length as much as I would want them to, or like, you start to get that feeling of like wanting the song to maybe get to the end rather than just feeling immersed in it. But I'm really liking it, and I'm definitely going to be listening to it a lot more. So it'll be interesting to see where it kind of lands in my Snarky Puppy rankings long term. Next, I have number 3, which is Getting Killed by Geese. This was my most anticipated album of the year because I absolutely love 3D Country by Geese, their previous album. It's grown into one of my favorite albums of all time. And Getting Killed is really, really good. It definitely pushes in some new directions, I think. It's got a little less like traditional song structures compared to 3D Country, so there's maybe less obvious like hooks. It's a little bit more like free flowing with how it goes with some of these, but these just captivating grooves. They're almost these hypnotic grooves behind it, and some of the drum work and everything. I mean, there's some just great musicianship happening here to get a really fresh sound, and I really, really enjoy it. I mean, it's number 3 on my list. I think for me, it's still a significant step down from 3D Country. That's just my personal taste. But I've also had a lot more time with 3D Country, so maybe time will prove otherwise. But excellent album from Geese. Got to see them perform this live with Racing Mount Pleasant. That was the concert. Killer concert to get my number 5 and number 3 albums in the same concert. Very much enjoyed that. So number 3, I've got Getting Killed by Geese. It doesn't sound pleasant. It doesn't sound pleasant to get killed by geese. Number 2, probably maybe the biggest surprise on the list as far as how high this is. Because let me tell you, I am not normally a rap hip hop guy. But this is Magic Alive by McKinley Dixon. Now, I try in this genre. I listen to most of the really highly rated stuff and give it a chance. And I don't have like any innate aversion to the genre. Like there's some things like the, black death metal that I just know I don't like the sound of that vocal style and stuff. So like it's pretty much no chance that an album there is going to suddenly surprise me. Whereas hip hop, like I like a lot of the elements of it actually, and the flow and the beats and these kinds of things, but there's usually something that keeps me from really enjoying it, whether that's it being very kind of profane or vulgar, or it just being too repetitive and not feeling like that instrumental does enough interesting under the rapping. But man, this album, like I think I can confidently say it's my favorite rap album of all time. The instrumentation here is so cool with this jazzy, very live sound, and just the drums and bass grooving all over the place underneath what I think is very interesting rap flows and arrangements, and just and it also manages to do it without getting super explicit like it. So it avoids some of my like pitfalls with a lot of rap albums, and then like pushes it in a direction that so aligns with my taste with some of this very like jazz backed instrumentation. So the more I've listened to this one, the more I've liked it, and that's why you always gotta be willing to get a little bit out of your genres, because here it is at my number 2 of the year, Magic Alive by McKinley Dixon. My number 1 is, if you're someone who keeps up with music, you're probably never going to have heard of this album because this is not like a big release, but is from an artist that I actually had really enjoyed one of his earlier albums. This is the album, As Long As I Am in the Tent of This Body, I Will Make a Joyful Noise, Part 1 by John Van Deusen. Now, I struggle with a lot of like contemporary Christian music as a genre. Most of it does not land for me as music that I want to like listen to for personal enjoyment, or it's just not usually what I'm drawn towards. And so I think I get in my mind that like kind of ruling out most of that genre is something to like actively explore. But John Van Deusen kind of broke through that stigma for me with his album, I Am Origami. Man, his album names are so long, I can't remember them. I Am Origami Part 2, Every Power Wide Awake, I believe is that one. And really enjoyed that album, and was like, man, I feel like this is the first time in a long time or ever that I was listening to an album that was very, overtly Christian lyricism. Like there's no like hiding here, because sometimes you'll get music that's like, oh, it's by a Christian artist, and like if you kind of like pick at the words, you can kind of see where they're coming from, but it's so like metaphorical that it could really be about anything. That's not the case here. Like this is pretty on the nose. But it was something that I felt like I actually really liked the musical side of it and the arrangements and everything, and it really comes together in such a good way. Now, he had released a bunch of albums since then that I'd been okay on. And he varies a lot. Like, he'll kind of go in very different directions. So, it wasn't like he was just staying in the same lane as that album that I really liked from him. I would say this album is very much kind of returning to that lane. And this one has landed for me so well. It kept being in rotation, and it really reaffirmed for me that it's like, oh, hey, like I actually do like this type of lyricism if it's done in a way that musically also jives, and it's actually very encouraging, the type of music that having this in your rotation is kind of a nice life compass and things for the things that I personally value. So this is one that shot up my list. I'm eagerly waiting part 2 of this, which is supposedly coming out maybe in this next year. It originally was going to be one giant project that got split into 2. But absolutely love what John Van Deusen is doing here. I would say if you were in the same camp as me, as being like very tentative to check out any like contemporary Christian music, maybe try this one. You might like it. I definitely have. And that caps off my top albums from 2025.